In Expensya, the worst scenario in our business actually happened. It's called COVID. And then when travel stops, our revenue dropped 85%. And so when your revenue drops 85%, you realize that in ARR, you say recurring revenue, but it wasn't that recurrent. You thought it was, but it was actually reoccurring revenue, not recurrent. That was, I think, the toughest moment in our entrepreneurial life is what do you do? So COVID hits, your revenue drops, your investors start to freak out. And the miracle that happened is that we managed to convince some investors that that pivot can work. And we signed that Series B when our revenue was shrinking. And I still to this day don't know why they said yes, but that changed the company. At that time, we dropped from 4 to 3 million ARR, and we did our Series B and we exited at way above 10 million. I'm glad we did that. Obviously, it's a pretty weird feeling to sign an acquisition. We were lucky with Jihad is that the acquisition process was very slow. So we had time to think, to have second thoughts, to get our families used to the idea. You also have some taboo discussions. One of the taboos is that as an entrepreneur, you starve a lot. You underpay yourself, you pay people better than yourself. You get used to it year after year, and then you'll suddenly have a lot of money. And so what do you do? And what do you do with that money? And what do you do with the rest of your life? And as you said, a lot of people go into depression, and we're resisting that and making sure we don't go into depression. And then what do you do next in your life? When Expensya was really hard, especially in the middle of COVID, with Jihad, we agreed that we would never do another startup again. Okay. But I think what happens is that I think it's like when people decide to have a second child, I think they forget about how hard it was for the first one. And so for us, it's the same. I think we forgot the tough ones where you're near depression and you want to stop. And now we see AI, we see the opportunity, we see that we could help so many fellow CPOs and CTOs, and the adrenaline is too high, it's too exciting.
Hello, Internet, and welcome to episode 10 of the RCP podcast. My name is Kyane, and I'm a general partner at RCP. Today's guest is Karim Jouini, who's the founder of Expensya, an expense management platform that's been in the news for its recent exit. Karim's achievement is an important one for the region, as he capitalized on what we call the Tunisian playbook, which is to build locally and sell globally. His company ended up being acquired by Medius Group for over $100 million. While most exited founders take some time off, travel the world, or write a book, Karim decided to start a new company right away. I'm grateful that Karim chose this podcast to reveal what he's working on next, an AI testing agent for software teams. This is a special episode that required a different format, an hour-long conversation to dive into Karim's journey in building and selling Expensya, as well as understand his reasoning behind his new entrepreneurial adventure. And without further ado, let's get into the conversation. Hi, Karim. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. Good morning.
Really appreciate it, man. For those who don't know, you're the founder and ex-CEO of Expensya. You've built it over almost a decade. Then you recently had this exit, rumored to be at 100 million plus. For those who don't know, can you just tell us quickly, what is Expensya? What does it do?
Expensya is a spend management solution. So it's really made for employees that are traveling or they have to spend because they're autonomous, work from home. They need to buy a LinkedIn subscription. They need to buy SaaS products, all of that. They need to have access to company money to do their job, to make it simple. So Expensya is a mobile and web app, as well as a series of AI algorithms and a corporate card that allows you access to company money in a legal and secure way and allows the company to manage all of that.
We'll go into details later on, but just to start from your journey when I first met you, and it was the very early days of Expensya, what were the biggest challenges that you were facing in the early days?
When you start a SaaS company, you have a lot of challenges. And when you started from Africa, you have even more challenges. But maybe I will focus on two. One is access to talent. It's a real challenge in the different markets. It's not that the talent is not good. It's the talent doesn't have been there, done that experience that is really relevant to SaaS. So that is a key challenge. And we have spent a lot of our energy making sure we can attract and retain top talent and also create the right work culture that wasn't that common in Tunisia 10 years ago. So that's one element of challenge. The second element is us. We have missed the product market fit in the beginning, meaning that we built a solution in our mind for corporates because we have worked at Microsoft, we have worked at large banks. And then we learned the hard way that corporates don't buy from new startups, especially if they're based in Africa, because they are concerned you might go out of business and they will be stuck with the solution they can't run. And so that was also a second challenge is how do you move from there? You build the wrong solution and you need to move to a different segment.
At which point did you figure out that you missed product market fit? And how did you realize that there was something that needed to be done and you cannot continue on this path anymore?
There are multiple signs. One big sign is between V1 and our first customer, we spent 4 months without any customer. It requires a lot of self-esteem. Like you built and you have less customers than employees. And so we had to really challenge ourselves, understand what did we get wrong, talk to as many users as we can. It had a free trial, so people were trying it and then leaving it. And so I called every trial tester that accepted my call, learned from them, and then pivoted to selling to SMB. Although we never believed in the SMB market, so we can talk about it a little bit more, I don't believe there will be any winner in the SMB space. And so we started selling to SMBs like freelancers and then 10 people company, then 100 people company. And then we built slowly our reputation. And then we managed in 24 months to be successful in our sweet spot, which is mid-market. So that's companies between 100 and 10,000 employees, roughly. Not corporates, not the tiny SMB.
For the general public, when we say expense management, the first names that come to mind is Brex and Ramp. They have the strongest brand, they're very vocal, and they're huge in the US. I want your honest, blunt opinion about their business. Do you think that's the right model? Do you think it will work? Do you think it's overhyped?
I think there are strong companies with strong products, 2 very different companies, Brex and Ramp. I think that Brex is also expressing the same. There's no future in the SMB space. I truly believe it. Expensify is shrinking. They have a negative growth year over year for 2 years now. And I haven't looked at Brex numbers, but I can bet that on the SMB, it's the same. And so Brex started doing things like you can no longer sign up if you have less than 10 employees. And they start to show that they want to move away from the SMB. But I think a lot of their marketing and their execution is very SMB. And I believe most of the market is mid-market. I believe Brex has a great product, so they would make it happen. But there will be a lot of questions around valuation. When you raise at billions of valuation and Expensify that is bigger than you is valued at 150 million, how do you go from there? And this is an advice to entrepreneurs as well. If you raise at massive valuations, it's amazing for the ego, but it makes the next round harder if the market is going down. And this is what happened in 2023 and 2024. The valuations are much lower. So I have doubts about Brex for that point, but they have a great product. Ramp is a bit different. Ramp is mid-market, although they have a massive set of customers, SMB, but they are mid-market. And Ramp, they have marketed themselves as being a platform being built. So they don't market themselves as being expense management. They market themselves as being a spend management platform that will do all the functions. They do travel, they do procurement, they do bill pay, they do all of these. And they market it as they have, quote, the smartest and fastest software engineering processes and teams. The future will tell us if that matters. But that's my take on the 2 companies. And I think these are 2 very solid startups.
Over the past 3 years, we've been flooded by pitch decks from founders saying we're building the Brex of Africa, the Brex of Asia, the Brex of LatAm. Do you think there is room for a 100 million business for a Brex of Africa, for example?
There is, but it's always a dangerous business model to be. Negative people would say a Me Too business. Positive people would say it's a business that you have tailored to a different market. And it's not so easy to execute because you believe copy paste works, but actually the markets are so different that it's actually a new journey. It's not a copy paste. And often your exit strategy becomes, I exit to a bigger actor that wants to become more global. I think that execution can be super successful, but is risky because you're building it in a way so that you can exit to someone global. And so I would never recommend to an entrepreneur to call it the Brex of Africa unless they have the strategy. Now, some companies have proven that it can be massive success, like Karim, the Uber of Middle East. They exited at a
3 billion acquisition price.
3 billion acquisition. They were bought by Uber. But it's one of the riskiest model because you have a single potential buyer or you have 3 potential buyers. And so if these guys decide to not buy you, your valuation is challenged. And so my advice to entrepreneurs, don't do it just to be a Me Too business. Do it if you think that you can bring something unique to that market, something that helps the customers of that market thrive and get value out of your product. And don't call it the Brex of Africa, please.
We've looked at many of them and invested in a couple. I would say, the imminent revenue streams are not that interesting. Interchange fees, how much do you need of that, or interest on float? But the roadmap is usually we're going to get sizable enough that you can apply for a license and become a B2B neobank. What do you think of that?
I think it's the right strategy. It's much better than the strategy of I'm going to be so local that Brex will want to buy me. Focusing on getting up the value chain, as you're saying, like you're getting maybe 20% of interchange, and then you can, with volume, you get to 40, and then you get to 50. And in Expensya, we have 85.
Humble flex.
Yeah, and you get a license, and then you can do maybe buy now, pay later. You can do credit, and you can do. But again, my focus is what can you bring to your customers? If you're building it as an African solution, that's great. But make sure the African customers love your product, love your value, and then I think the revenue follows.
I tried not to use AI so far, but now we have to. So in the era of AI, do you think AI is going to super boost these companies, or do you think it's going to destroy them?
I think AI as a way of working, as a workflow, as an agent is going to replace these workflows and solutions. It doesn't mean they're going to replace the company. The companies could be the ones building it. But I'm part of the extremists that believe that SaaS, as we know it today, is going to gradually disappear. And we would move from a software as a service that I buy to empower my professional, like my CFO, to do better decisions and to automate the workflows and to do fraud prevention and all of that. We'll move from that model to I'm buying a CFO. It's a radically different way of seeing the industry. So it's no longer I buy a product for my CFO, it's I buy a CFO. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but you start to see it in different industries where, for example, even the startup we launched with Jihad, it's a software engineer that is capable of writing specs, writing code.
We're talking about the new one.
The new one,
Yeah.
Yes. So Thunder, we call it Thunder, and it has multiple agents, ThunderCode and ThunderTest, and etc. But it's capable of writing specs, reviewing specs, writing code, testing, and by testing, I mean testing like a human being. And so it's no longer, if you compare to another test platform, it's no longer I buy a test platform that I give to my QA team so that they can manage the test plans and execute them. It becomes I buy a QA. You see what I mean? And I believe, to go back to your question on AI, that AI will gradually become, instead of I buy Brex to manage my expense reports, is I rent a CFO that happens to manage expense reports. And I think that shift will happen faster than we think. I think it's a decade journey and not a multi-decade journey, I think.
And you pay per use.
You pay per use.
And the outcome is the work. You're paying for the end result, not for the software that gives you the result.
Exactly. So I'll give you an example in ThunderTest. You can say, here's the documentation of my product. So I have a SaaS product. Here's the documentation of my SaaS product. Can you test it, ensure the UX is great, give me advices on performance, give me advices on SEO? And it's going to go from that documentation and build what the QA would do. You see what I mean? So it's not a new process. It's just the same process as your quality assurance team would do, but done by an AI in a disturbingly human way. So break it down, visit the app, navigate through it, build test cases, execute them, discover ways to improve the product. All of that is what a QA team would do. And we do it as an agent. And I believe that way of thinking will be across the industry. I can give you another example outside of our industry. Today, every company has HR and admin functions. And your HR does a lot of things that are very useful and some things that you have to do, but not exciting. For example, writing contracts for new employees. So today, as a CEO of a maybe 50 people company, you would send an email or tag your HR and say, hey, I have this new employee coming in. Can you prepare all the paperwork? Your HR will have some tools like SharePoint, Notion, maybe templates of contracts. We'll get the documents, we'll fill up the templates. Or maybe you will have a SaaS product where you can just enter in boxes and it generates the contract. That's SaaS. The future is you open Slack, you talk to the agent and you say, I have a new employee, can you prepare the paperwork? And then the AI is doing what that your admin would have done, which is get the paperwork of the employee, look at the template, fill the template, send the template. The difference is really there. It's not in what work is happening, it's in who does the work. And me as a CEO, instead of buying a product for my HR, I will rent that HR with credits, and the credits are how much work I get out of that AI.
But to be able to do that, they need to have full context. So you can't build in silos anymore. It has to be all interconnected so that they know when they can reach the different resources from different databases or systems.
Absolutely. These agents have to be treated like an employee. When you get an employee, you onboard the employee. You give the employee access to your knowledge base, to your tools, to your templates, to all of that. And so these AIs will have to go through the same process of onboarding. And once the AI is onboarded, then you interact with the AI like you would interact with an employee. So it will be on Slack, on Teams, and that AI, you will give it the same instructions you would give to a human being. I believe that's the future of the SaaS industry.
Since we're talking about ThunderCode, your new company, I'm curious, out of all the ideas that you had and probably you brainstormed and explored a few paths, how were you able to kill the other ideas and say, yeah, it's this one. This is the one that I'm going to spend the next 10 years on?
So it's really just like how we started Expensya, meaning we looked at pains that we have, pain points, and looked at how well are these pain points addressed and what is the level of the competition on these pain points, and do we have the resources to go after it. So it's very a processed way of thinking. For Expensya, it was simple. Expense reporting solutions sucked at that time. We looked at why. There were good reasons. Some were legal, some were technological. We believe that tech and legislation are changing. We can disrupt it. And we decided to go. So here it's the same. Going through Expensya, CEO and CTO, we always felt that product was slowing us. Product is us, but the product function is slowing us because you have so many opportunities you can go after, but then you can't because you can't produce software fast enough. You can't test it fast enough. And then you have quality issues. And then you have so many different customers that they use it differently. And so you end up with quality issues in some corners and all of that. And we always thought if we could go faster, we would have built a much bigger business if we could produce software faster. And so we looked at it. We, of course, know a lot of the tools that you use in software development as we are a software company. And we've been following everything that is happening in generative AI. There is a lot of generative AI in Expensya and in Medius. And we saw this alignment between the problem is huge, the market is huge, the foundational technology exists. Let's build a solution out of that. The market is not yet mature, and there is a place to create a unicorn in that space. And that's what excited us.
And in retrospect, looking back at the whole Expensya chapter of your life, can you tell me the stories about getting your very first 2-3 clients? Like, how did you secure those first ones?
Okay, so when we pivoted to selling to smaller customers, we moved to fully product-led. And so you had the free trial. We built marketing campaigns, especially on mobile, because we had a native mobile app, and marketing on the mobile app was cheap at that time to market on Apple Store. And so it's super funny. We just got free trials and then we converted them. And I have a funny story is that the first customer to pay was at that time someone that just left leading Apple France. And so I was shocked. So I called the person. I was like, how on earth did you choose us? And he was like, I went on the App Store, searched for expense reporting, found 3 apps, tested it. It's the best. That's it. And it's a massive boost to the journey.
In the early days, how did you prioritize the product development versus the customer feedback that you received? It's a lot of noise. You can't build everything for everyone. And usually your first clients are asking for a lot of features. So how did you prioritize that?
It's a never ending problem. So no one has a magical solution for that, but we strive to be as data driven as we can. We look at what customers ask. We cost it. So we see what is the cost for us and how hard is it to build. And then we build statistics on how often customers ask for it. How much is it our sweet spot? And how can we make that repeatable as much as we can? But no one has a magical solution because you want to keep your customers. You don't want them to churn. But sometimes having customers churn is the best thing that can happen. Having the wrong customer is the worst. We've had some, I won't give names. Some are still customers of Expensya, but we have a few customers that we should never have had. And sometimes it's better to let them churn. I don't have a magical answer to that. It's an everyday struggle.
When starting Expensya, you probably had your own assumptions and theses about the expense management segment. And over time, it probably changed. I'm curious about what were you thinking then versus now about this category?
I'll give you some that stayed and some that changed. The ones that stayed are, one is we believe there will be no winner in SMB. That's why we exited SMB quickly. And the reason we believe there will be no winner in SMB is the bundled versus unbundled conversation. We believe SMBs needed to be bundled. They don't have the IT to go play with too many solutions. And so they needed bundled. The problem of a bundled solution is that expense will always be an add-on. The things that you need to have as an entrepreneur are a bank account. And so banks will bundle solutions like that. And just look at Revolut B2B or Conto in France, or all of these guys, they do some expense reporting. I believe it sucks, but it's often enough for a tiny company. You need an accountant. And so the accounting softwares will bundle, like Penny Lane in France or solutions like that. And payroll. You need payroll to pay your employees. And payroll solutions will bundle expenses. And so I always believe that the solutions that spend massive amounts of marketing to win all this SMB, like Playo, for example, I believe, but the future will tell us, that Playo has no future in how they execute. And if Playo listens to this, they say I'm an arrogant, stupid guy. But I just believe that at some point, why would someone that has a Revolut or a Conto or whatever digital bank would need to buy an add-on for expense reporting if you're a tiny company? If you're a large company, you don't care about bundling. You care about making sure the solution actually works for your 1,000 employees. No bank solution works. So that stayed the same. The second that stayed, and I'm glad it stayed because it was risky, is, in Expensya today we have corporate cards that we issue. And it was a big debate that I even had with some competitor founders when we started. Some of the competitors like Divi, Spendesk, etc., are card first. So they start with the card. That's how they market, they sell. So it's a card that happens to have a software. And Expense is a software that happens to have a card. And we believe that the payment stack is too complex and it's going to be a commodity at some point. And this leads us to the other conversation of, do you build yourself or do you rely on a partner? A lot of these guys built themselves super complex payment stacks that now you can buy for free or you can buy for almost free. So expensive today, we rely on a third party and we keep 85% of the revenue, but we didn't have to build. I think it took 2 people for 6 months when other solutions took like 60 people for 5 years. That commodity part, the fact that it became a commodity, is also why you have so many new card-based solutions out in the market right now. So that stayed. Things that changed in terms of assumptions. From an implementation perspective, we underestimated how much verticals matter. You think everyone does expense management, right? So you could sell to any industry. And then you start to realize that some people that are highly verticalized, they start eating in your customer base because they understand that vertical better than you. And so I say to every SaaS founder, think about verticals. Did you have a vertical that impacts you? And so in Expensya, we just organically moved into some verticals that we never thought about it, but we ended up winning, like banking. Like most of the banks in France use Expensya. Funnily, some of them use our corporate cards, knowing that they are issuers, but let's not shame them. And the reason is that when you look at expense reports, it's a pretty basic process if you look at it. It's just you snap a photo and you send your expense report, and you could think it's 3 buttons and 2 workflows. But in reality, you have a lot of industry-based things. I'll give you one example. Pharmaceuticals. When they have salespeople that go and sell and market products to doctors, etc., they have specific reporting to do that they have to do legally. It's by law that is specific reporting that I have to do. And so if you don't support that reporting or you don't have a partner that is capable of supporting it, you can't sign any pharmaceutical company. Or you sign it and then you struggle to implement. That's one of the biggest struggles, understanding verticals. And finally, something ended up pretty different to our assumption. You assume SaaS companies always grow because you always assume that you have marketing, you win leads, these that become customers. Some of them do churn, but they churn less than what you win as customers, and that the world is stable. Okay. And you always grow. And in Expensya, we had the experience of basically the black swan. The worst scenario in our business actually happened. It's called the COVID. If you market your product as being massively travel related and travel stops, that is a scenario you never had in your mind. And Expensya, when we started it, it's usage based. So we sell to a customer and it's active user based. So you can deploy it to every employee of the customer, but the customer only pays you if that employee does at least an expense for that month. And then when travel stops, our revenue dropped 85%. And so when your revenue drops 85%, you realize that in ARR, you say recurring revenue, but it wasn't that recurrent. You thought it was, but it was actually reoccurring revenue, not recurrent, meaning you didn't have a way to lock your customer into that revenue. But that wasn't the worst. The worst was that our sales strategy relied on travel. Although our product actually is not travel related, but for example, our biggest reseller was Expensya. Expensya is Expedia B2B. So they have a branch called Expensya. In some of the markets, half my leads were coming from Expensya. Expensya bankrupted in 3 months. So they went, in 3 months, they were going out of business and they were acquired by American Express. And so that was, I think, the toughest moment in our entrepreneurial life is, what do you do? So COVID hits, your revenue drops, your investors start to freak out. And by the way, I thank them. I thank them because they freaked out less than I expected. And then what do? A couple of miracles happened then. The first wasn't a miracle, was a decision. We decided with Jihad to say, we're going to invest more instead of cutting cost so that we end up stronger than competition at the exit of COVID, because most of the people started cutting cost. And we believe that the market will restart eventually and that we need to be strong. And a lot of our investment were to pivot how we sell. So we were selling as corporate travel and we moved to selling as being a CFO app. So even the scenarios we talk about are much less about you're traveling and you go to a restaurant, and it becomes you're managing home office allocations because you need to manage that for your employees in different countries that build laws about that. Or it becomes you're paying your LinkedIn subscription or you're paying SaaS products. So the use cases we present were becoming more and more different. And the miracle that happened is that we managed to convince some investors that that pivot can work. And we signed that Series B when our revenue was shrinking. And I still to this day don't know why they said yes, but that changed the company because they said we will fund this pivot. At that time, we dropped from 4 to 3 million ARR, and we did our Series B and we exited at way above 10 million. I'm glad we did that.
Well, it's interesting you said you try to sell to corporates, but usually they don't want to buy from an African company. And it's just a difficult decision for that specific employee to make, so that if something wrong happens, then they would go back and say, why did you choose this solution versus a little bit more expensive solution from Europe?
Absolutely.
But nobody wants to take the blame, so they go with a safe option.
Absolutely. There is a lot of that. Oracle slogan for some time, its internal hidden slogan was, you never get fired for choosing Oracle. So there is a bit of that, but there is also a bit of pure rational. Like European market has a lot of constraints for corporates. You have GDPR, so you have all the data privacy rules that you have to follow. You need solutions that have some type of certifications that usually a tiny startup doesn't have. And just simply beyond the African startup, they are concerned that young startups do die at a high rate. And that's just the truth. And that if you deploy a solution to 20,000 employees and then that solution goes down, you're just stuck. And it's super costly to change solutions. And so today, with the 10 years experience, I think it's normal that corporates think like that. But we really missed it in the beginning.
There's something you posted on Facebook 7 years ago, and you might be surprised because it stuck with me and it comes back to my mind oftentimes. And it was an advice, but I often encounter the total opposite advice. So I'm curious if 7 years later, things have changed. You posted, never build anything internally if you can buy it. Remember?
Absolutely.
I think there's a story of you just spending so much time and effort trying to build something versus an off-the-shelf solution. But a lot of the founders I meet would say the total opposite, which is don't be relying on these third parties, build everything in-house. So do you still believe in that?
I believe in that because it matters to build your own solution once you're successful. And so if you start building everything you need yourself before you're successful, you're never sure you really need that component and it is really strategic and it won't become a commodity. And so I truly believe that the best code is the code you don't write, and that you should rely on as many third parties as you can and only focus on the biggest differentiation you have and why customers love you, and then rely on third parties everywhere. Of course, sometimes that third party is actually super critical. And so if that third party unplugs, you're dead. And that can happen. And it happened to us at least 3 times where a third party said, we're unplugging you. And it was a struggle to keep going. One of them was Google Maps. At some point, people remember Google Maps API used to be free. And then in 4 weeks, they went to the big users of Google Maps API and told them, now you have to pay. And it was a massive price. And so we went for a 4 weeks battle with Google Maps to secure an affordable price. And so, of course, when you see that, you're like, maybe we should have used OpenStreetMap and built a different thing. So I'm not saying the risk does not exist. I just think that the value of using third party massively outweighs any benefit you have from building your own stuff.
As you mentioned in the example of that Apple lead, when he was trying, there were 3 apps on the App Store and it was one of them. Now there's probably 50 of them. So when you started, expense management wasn't really the category and wasn't that hot. And I think you were kind of head-to-head with Expensify in the US. How did you handle the newcomers and competition in general?
It's a very good point. I actually slightly disagree with the number of competitors. Is the number of visible competitors has increased. But what happens in innovation in general is that there are a set of problems in the market. Then there is a set of new innovation or regulation changes or things that make people believe, oh, we can disrupt it and let's run for it. And so what happens usually is that in a small time span, you have hundreds or thousands of people that say, there is a market, I'm going after it. And then you have a natural selection that happens. And so today we think there is more competition, but actually there is more funded, visible competition, but it's actually less than when we started. When we started Expensya in Europe, which is our core market when we started, there was at least 200 competitors I could point to. Today, there is maybe 15 that survived, but the 15 that survived are bigger. Now, if you look at these 15 European competitors, they're actually not all competitors because in SaaS in general, segmentation is important. So in spend management, you basically have at least 3 main segments and a second dimension. So the 3 segments are, you have solution for SMB. So they're quick to get, they're cheap, you don't need support to deploy them, etc. And they work with SMB. And then you have mid-market, guys like us. And then you have corporate, solution for corporate. And so these, they usually don't really compete because customers don't compare these solutions. It's like a car and a truck, they do compete to some extent, but they don't have the same customers. And then you have another dimension that is very interesting in our business is the corporate card. Do you have a card? Are you pure SaaS or are you fintech? And that's also another dimension. And so to answer your question, how do we compete with the competitors? We make sure that our differentiation is super clear. Our segment is super clear. We don't go after customers that are in the sweet spot of our competitors. And that massively reduces the amount of competition. So as Expensya, we have, I would say, 3-4 competitors that we meet at every RFP and we meet at every customer. And then it's quality of your sales agents, it's quality of your marketing, it's pricing that makes the last mile. But there is less competition than we think.
What North Star metrics were you obsessed with over this decade as a first-time founder? And now that you're starting a new entrepreneurial adventure, how are those metrics changing as a second-time founder?
Over 10 years of Expensya, the North Star has changed because of how our product evolved. There is one North Star that almost stayed the whole journey. It is the amount of time spent between when you do an actual spend and when it's in the ERP. So let's say you go to the restaurant at noon on Monday, how much time it needs before it gets to the ERP. A typical company that is not well equipped, that is 2 months. At Expensya, we want that to be less than 24 hours. So that's the North Star. And then we look segment per segment, customer per customer. Where is time lost? Is it in capturing the information? Is it in the approval by the manager? Typically, for example, one of the things we're investing a lot on now is approving by AI. So we have an AI that can replace managers that does the whole approval and then integrating in the ERP. So I would say that's the main North Star that is followed by the product.
And were there any experiences during your building or exit process where you thought you were prepared, but certain nuances or unexpected aspects caught you off guard and taught you something new?
Every step of the journey. Honestly, every step in the journey. I spent 7 years at Microsoft. I was convinced that building the product won't be the hardest, and it was hard. And then I had substantial savings at that time, and you think you can run with it, and actually you can't. You need to raise much more because SaaS is expensive. And then you think raising money is something you've read about it for so long, and then it's much harder than you think. And exit is much harder than you think. So to be really honest, there is a key skill for entrepreneurs is to be able to challenge yourself, to say, maybe I'm wrong, and then to learn as fast as you can. I think that it really differentiates great entrepreneurs from the rest of the crowd. So I think, yeah, a lot of things were much harder.
Based on this answer, would you say that you were constantly improvising all along the way? Because I think most founders are improvising, and that's how life is. Even adults improvise.
Of course.
But when speaking to investors, you have to show confidence. You have to show that you know what you're doing. How do you marry these two aspects of showing that you have things under control and that you know the playbook and you know what you're doing versus in reality, you're constantly experimenting and improvising?
I wouldn't say improvising, but I would say full of doubts. Yes. And I think it's one of the hard things of being an entrepreneur. And I think it even impacts mental health in general is that as an entrepreneur, you have to show confidence to everyone. So you have to show confidence to employees, although you sometimes don't know how you're going to pay next month. You have to show confidence to your spouse because she doesn't want to see you going down. You have to show confidence to your investors. So you have to continuously show confidence. But I think there is a thin line that some entrepreneurs do cross that I think you should never cross, which is lying. And so you have some level of transparency you have to keep while showing confidence, meaning it's okay to have doubts that, hey, we actually could have these 3 scenarios, but I'm betting on this one. And so to be able to show that confidence, you need to have a lot of data. And so as an entrepreneur, I spend a lot of my time, if not most of my time, reading stuff. I will be subscribed to a ton of newsletters because that data, as you accumulate it, helps you know what to do. And if the level of doubt is too high, I personally have no ego problem to go to other people and say, how did you do it? I often say to my co-founder that I use a Tunisian expression, but you could translate as something like, you're one question away from the answer. And so it's okay to go ask. And then once you've asked all these questions and gathered data, you can show confidence while being humble.
All right, it's story time. Can you tell us a story about some of the failures, setbacks that you had at Expensya, and how did you navigate that?
It's a good question. I could have many stories, but maybe I'll give you one that is dear to my heart. I think one of the big failures we have in the company is burning people out. We had multiple burnouts. I can think of at least 4 big ones. And if I reflect back on it, how do you lead people to burnout? Of course, it's always multidimensional and people that have their own baggage and all of that. But I think now that we started a new venture, I would do it very differently. Is that high scale companies grow faster than the people in the company, including the founders, meaning that the company will grow, but that person in that specific position often can't grow as fast. I'll give you an example. You hire a CMO, you're 5 people, you hire a CMO, fine. That CMO is responsible for all of the marketing of the startup. The startup has 0 customers, has maybe 1 market, it has the ambition to grow in. But then you grow and then multiple years go in and now you have 5,000 customers and you have 6 countries and you have no guarantee that that CMO has grown fast enough to do that. If you let that CMO struggle to go as fast, you often lead the person to burn out if the person is highly engaged. What you can do differently is when you hire that CMO, you make the journey clear, meaning today you're CMO of the whole thing. We will together succeed and grow. And when we hit these specific milestones, we will sit together and see if we need to scale the team by hiring above the CMO instead of just under the CMO. Meaning between a CMO of 0 customers, 0 market, and a CMO of only France, 5,000 customers, I think that's a real improvement in career. You don't need to be the CMO global. You can still hire someone from outside. And I think that is what I personally feel the most, and I wouldn't say guilty, but the most responsible for is I feel I have a responsibility for burning out a few people if we better manage that transition. What I would definitely do differently now is having the transparent conversation. And now we're having it when we hire people. We say, here's how the journey could look like. It makes that journey much less painful to everyone. I can give you another failure example in the corporate conversation. So I told you we were trying to sell to corporate and we understood it was the wrong market. So we went to SMB, and with SMB, we got the reputation, and also we learned how to better manage the company, the product, the customer support, etc. And then at some point we got a call from a big corporation in France, Elior, to give the name, which is the biggest restaurant chain manager in Europe. And they were launching an RFP. And so our biggest customer had 20 employees. These guys have 20,000. So we were like, should we go for it? But we were entrepreneurs. We said, let's go. So we went to the RFP, and these guys really liked our vision, really liked our product, but they did not realize, and we did not realize, that our product was not mature enough for them. And so they decided to do a POC. The POC was a disaster, complete disaster. We spent all our nights on it and we didn't make it happen. We lost the RFP. And we were lucky enough that the company decided to pause the project for a year. A year after they relaunched the RFP, we tried really hard to get into it. And then the CFO called me and said, the first experience was a disaster. Why would we do it differently? And I said, you have my guarantee that if things go wrong, I will come personally do people's expense reports. So we went to do the RFP. It went much better. I still had to do people's expense reports a couple of times. Really, like I had to go do the CEO's expense reports. But then we won the RFP and we moved along with them. So I think the lesson from that, resilience, obviously, and it's much more beautiful said after the fact, but the POC failure almost broke the company. Really, almost broke the company. So the lesson is really don't go after customers just because there is money. Go after customers you can address.
Fantastic. What tools and resources have been invaluable to Expensya?
There is a book I really like. It's a bit old school, but it's called What Would Google Do? And what I really like about What Would Google Do is that it forces you to, when you have a problem, to think, what if I had the Google resources, which is virtually infinite compared to a startup? What would I do? And then once you have that solution in mind, then you degrade it to what you can do. But a lot of people will think small from the beginning. Is what can I do with my limited resources? Which can be the right answer, but can also block you from seeing opportunities you could have done. And so one of the most transformative ways we use that is when we started doing B2B sales. So I said we started with SMB, but then you try to go up markets and then you need B2B sales. We obviously thought we can do it. We started doing it ourselves. We started burning our money. And then we said, actually, we suck at it. We're happy to learn, but we need to learn much faster than by doing it ourselves. So we sat with Jihad and we thought, what would Google do? And in our space, in expense reporting, spend management, travel, the biggest actor is American Express. They are the biggest in the whole chain, travel agency, spend management, all of that. And so we went out and started talking to some of the leadership. And we ended up hiring the COO of Amex France and Benelux. And he was transformative into setting up a real sales strategy. How do you sell? So that's a tool I recommend, is what would Google do.
Never heard about this, and it's fascinating. I'm going to use this.
Perfect.
A lot of B2B founders, especially in SaaS, are stuck in the 3 to 5 million ARR territories. What advice would you give them to help them break through that next scale barrier and reach the 10 million ARR?
The advice is what got them there won't get them to beyond 3 to 5. We struggled at Expensya as well. We had a slowdown in growth around that limit. That feels like an artificial limit, but it really exists. And I think the difference between how you operate to that level and how do you go beyond it is how much is founder reliant, how much it's a craft, it's an art, versus how much it's an industry. So you need to move your craft to a factory. And that's the big difference. And so how do you move to a factory? And you have to have the image of the factory in mind. That means you need robots, like you need automation in the system. You need repeatability. So you need to ensure that your sales are capable of repeating what you're doing to a certain level. You need science. So you need to become data driven. You need to start dropping leads that don't look like the leads you need to have. You need to also raise money, because when you're an artist and it's a craft, you can be very efficient. You can spend less money because you tailor your answer to every lead. You're very lean. It's hard to be lean at 10 million ARR. So you need to raise money because you're going to hire sales that are less good than you are or less good than your star sales. You're going to spend marketing money a bit faster than usual. I would say that's the key thing. Is so many people would tell you, but I don't need to change what I'm doing because look at all the customers I've won. I'm making 3 million or I'm making 5 million. But the reality is what gets you to 3, 5 doesn't get you to above that. And you have to change again later at 20, 30 million. It's another different company. So yeah, that's my advice, is think factory.
That's why entrepreneurship is so hard, because every phase requires its own mindset, skill set, and even people. So you have to constantly reinvent yourself.
Absolutely. And sometimes you have to change some of the co-founders, because sometimes the company has grown faster than the co-founders are able of comprehending the next step. It could be through super hands-on advisors. And sometimes you have to change the CEO, you have to change the CTO. It's more common than we think, and it shouldn't be a taboo.
I have a lot of conversations with founders where they tell me, hey, I'm a 0 to 1 founder. I can set things up and put it on the right track. And then post Series B, I'd rather be a chairman and hire a CEO.
Absolutely.
I'm always skeptical. I'm like, is this short-term thinking? Is he trying to make a quick buck? But sometimes I'm like, no, actually that's humility and knowing that he's not Bezos. What do you think about these? Do you think you're a 0 to 1 founder?
I think there is both of what you said, or maybe 3 things. There is sometimes lack of self-esteem or lack of ambition or laziness because you're learning something completely new. It's like almost learning a new language. And it could be just because people think it's the easiest way to make money. You sell it and then you move on, and then the extra years are actually harder and you grow less fast. And sometimes it's just humility into realizing that it is a different skill set to manage hundreds of people than to manage a small team. Me, I see myself as, I don't really know the answer, but I see myself more of a 0 to 1 than a corporate guy. But I had a lot of fun getting Expensya above 10 million. And I think that under different circumstances, I would have a lot of fun getting it to 100 million. But maybe I will get it to 100 million with a different job, meaning that would happen through the merger, by the way. I moved through the merger from CEO of Expensya to CTO of all the products, and I had a lot of fun.
Interesting. Oh, I didn't know that. Perfect segue to the next question. How did you decide that it was time to sell? Maybe it wasn't a decision. I don't know. You tell me. There's always this dilemma, but shall I raise another round? Shall I look for buyers now? Many founders don't agree on raise versus keep building. What happened in your case?
It's normal that they don't agree because it's a very personal decision in reality. Here's the full story. It started with a strategic conversation, which is, if you look at our space, our market, 20 years ago, CFOs would buy an ERP that does everything. It sucks at everything, but it does everything. It's not collaborative. It's not global. If you need to implement in your country, it's a nightmare. Your employees don't have access to the ERP. It's only back office done by accounting and finance, but it does every function. And then SaaS and AI, or however you call it at that time, allowed specialists to start. And so these specialists are apps or solutions that focus on a single function in the company. Spend management is one function. Then you have accounts payable. Then you have receivables, and then you have the Stripe likes, and then you have all of these guys actually won. The market cap of these specialized solutions are actually much bigger than the ERPs. But through that journey, it put the CFO in a position where the CFO needs 30 solutions to run the company. And this problem is in every function. If you ask CMOs, they usually have 20, 30 solutions to it.
It's the usual natural cycle of bundling and unbundling and bundling.
Absolutely. And so we arrived at the conclusion, talking to our customers, seeing what's happening in the market, etc. We arrived at the conclusion that the future is platforms. And there is one platform we always use as an example because it's a successful one, is Microsoft Office. If you think at Microsoft Office, actually, the apps are quite unrelated in terms of use cases. Word and Excel have nothing to do in terms of use cases with PowerPoint, but they just work together and it makes sense and people got used to buy them together and it just works. And so we realized that we should probably go in a direction where we can give to the CFO the best of both worlds. It's highly specialized, highly collaborative, global. If you use Expensya and you start a new country, you could do it in 10 minutes. With the ERP, it's a 6-month project to implement a new country. So you could do that while being a platform that when you buy different modules that just work together, you don't have to do an IT project to interconnect them. And so we started looking at, should we raise money? Should we build it? So build, buy, or exit. Build, we looked at it with Jihad, my co-founder and CTO, and we realized the journey is going to be long and will probably be too long for the market, meaning we will have the different apps too late compared to other platforms. Second is, should we buy? And we started raising and we found commitments to around 100 million to raise and start buying companies. And then with Jihad and some other key people in the company, we decided that it's maybe too hard, or maybe that's not what we want to do at this time of our life. It's going to be a 10-year journey. We're going to massively dilute. It's going to be big. And we discussed with the board. And so it was on the table. And then during that time, what happens always when you have a good idea is that you have tens of people that have the same good idea because they see the same equation. We started having companies calling us because they were executing the second, which is raise and buy. So some people were executing the other plan. At that time, we went to our board and said, look, we can raise, and here's how it would look like, knowing that the financial markets were crashing at the same time. Or we have inbound buyers. Let's make them compete. And so we hired a bank, and the bank made the different options compete and the different buyers compete. Now that it's almost 2 years old, I can give some of the names. So we were approached by Revolut, B2B, by a large French bank, by US-based competitors, and by Medius, this Swedish origin company that is backed by US-based private equity, Malin and Advent. Malin and Advent had the exact same idea of platform. They bought this Swedish company and then started plugging add-ons to it. Expensya was one of the add-ons. And so we went through the journey of negotiating that. And at the end, Medius won. Medius won because we believe it's the best product of the people that talk to us. It's the most aligned vision. And it was also the highest valuation at the end.
How did you come to the conclusion that the price that is being offered to you or that you were able to negotiate is the fair price? Because founders are usually biased and they always think, oh, I'm being undervalued here. They're making me a lowball offer. And a lot of acquisition talks that I've been part of fell off because the founder thinks they deserve much more. So that 100 million plus that you agreed on, how did you feel that it was the fair price?
It's really benchmarking plus other offers. It's as simple as that. We benchmark to publicly traded companies or companies that exited before us. So there was Divi that exited to Build.com sometime before us. There was Expensify that IPO'd in 2021 so that we could compare. And we had other offers. And at the end, it's, do you have an agreement that is everyone happy, basically? Are your investors happy? Are they making money? Do you think you're making enough money through it for the efforts? Are your co-founders making enough money? Are the employees making enough money? And also, there is a timing thing. I was convinced, and time has proven that it's true, that the startup funding market was going to collapse. And we are not geniuses for thinking that. It's just the interest rates went up. I can give you an example. Expensify IPO'd at $3 billion. Now it's valued maybe 150 million.
Brutal.
Yeah, it's brutal. They lost 95% of the value. And that is for many reasons. Some linked to Expensify itself, that they had a few tough years, but it's also linked to just the financing and the multiples that are in the market. At the end, what I can tell you is that at Expensya, we have had almost the same ARR multiple through all our rounds, including the exit. For some reason, it stayed flat.
Clean. Easy. So with Expensya, you perfectly executed what we call the Tunisian playbook, that InstaDip also does, and a few other companies, which is keep your cost base is low by having your back office and engineering team in Tunisia while having your sales and biz dev in Europe. It's the ambition of many founders, especially today with all the devaluation. Everyone wants to sell outside of Africa in USD while keeping their teams locally. First, why aren't more founders doing that if it sounds so obvious? And second, what are some of the downsides of such setup? How did you establish credibility with clients or even investors when you tell them that more than half of my team is back in North Africa? Tell me more about the playbook. Do you recommend it? You're probably going to do the same now. So
I really like that playbook. I definitely recommend it with some caveats. The advantage you get in the first few years is massive because you can raise much less. You can go faster. The quality of young talent in Tunisia is amazing. And it's the case in multiple African countries. If you execute well and you market, you can get access to that top 5% talent that honestly I can't get access to in Europe because I'm competing with Google and Microsoft and all of these guys. So in Tunisia, you can get access to that top talent at a much lower price point with an impressively fun and engaged work culture, and you can really execute fast. As you grow, that advantage becomes lower in reality because as you grow, most of your spend will be in your market. It's important that people keep that in mind. The money goes in the market. And so as we've grown, I think our spend in Tunisia was less than 20% as we've grown. But in the beginning, it is, I believe, the right playbook. The second condition, you need to have boots on the ground. You can't just be living in San Francisco and thinking you can have a back office in Tunis. No, you need to have someone. In Expensya, it's Jihad who decided to move from Paris with his family and settle in Tunisia. And he was a key success criteria to make the back office in Tunis work. Third is to not treat it as a back office. Tunis was the HQ from a structure perspective, from a talent perspective. We tried to hire every function in Tunis if we managed. Some were too hard, like hiring a super experienced SaaS sales is almost science fiction in Tunis. But we tried to hire every function in Tunis. And we had the back office functions, but we had a lot of the sales, the BDRs, we had the marketing, we had the professional services that train the customers and implement. And so really managed it as let's do as much as we can in Tunis. And if we can't, we will do in Europe. So I think these are the key things. HQ outside, have real boots on the ground, treat it as more than HQ, and then crack retention. Because if you hire top talent, they are employable anywhere in the world. And if they're employable anywhere in the world, they will go. And so you need to invest a lot in how do we keep them. Like I have Expenses in Amazon, in Google, Microsoft, and it's just the nature of hiring top talent. They do leave. And so with Jihad, one thing we've done is we have distributed a lot of stock options. Although it was a gray area in Tunis and how do you manage it and how do you make foreign currency stock options, but we have cracked it and now it's documented and we're happy to open source it. Anyone who wants to do stock options, happy to give them our paperwork. And so that made people believe they are not just a cheap back office, they are part of the adventure, while allowing our balance sheet to be better looking.
Most people listening, I would say, are in the different situation where they are already in the back office country. Let's say they're in Nigeria and say, we want to build this SaaS, we want to sell it to Europe and the US, but we want to do it from here because it's cheaper and can be competitive.
Of course.
So for them, the hard part is not the Nigeria part, is the other part. How do you go to Europe? How do you go to the US? How do you sell?
Hire local sales. Don't try. Hire local sales. I think people try too much to do it themselves. You can learn, but you learn better by watching someone in your team doing it.
And credibility wise, when you speak to a potential French investor or French client, and within the conversation, they get to know that you're a heavily African company, how do you not lose them?
You lose some of them. But for me, it's like getting married. You don't go after everyone. You go after the right match. And the way we raised money is that we would shortlist investors. We would have maybe 40 that we will talk to in a round. And you can imagine that out of 40, at least 35 tell us no. And then we focus on the ones that say yes. Some investors will say it's a no-go for me. Some other investors will say, I think it's amazing, but I need my investment to be in a European legal entity for fiscal reasons, for legal reasons. I also market the country to them. I made them fly here. I made sure that their trip is amazing. They just meet people that they think, yeah, they have top talent. And so the idea that you are in Africa disappears in their mind. It becomes just, what I tell them is that as if I had an office in Paris and an office in Lyon. So it's not Paris, but it's South Paris.
South Paris.
Yeah.
So as we're wrapping up, maybe the three last questions are more personal. Feel free, this is a safe space. But I'm curious. So first, when signing the acquisition docs, how does that feel? if it were me, I would just start crying, just having all the trauma of the past 10 years coming back and like all of this for this. And now it happens. How do you sleep? And when you wake up the day after, you're like, chapter Expensya is done. What do I do with my life? A lot of people get into depression and midlife crisis. And also, what was the process? How did you figure out what to do next in life? Did you write a book? Did you travel the world?
Wow, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. That's a really tough one. Obviously, it's a pretty weird feeling to sign an acquisition. It's really a weird feeling. We were lucky with Jihad is that the acquisition process was very slow. So we had time to think. We had time to have second thoughts. We had time to get our families used to the idea. I think it was hard on them as well. We also like to build jokes and comparisons, and we're telling them it's like if your daughter or your son is getting married. Yeah, sure. It's no longer your baby at home, but you still have a strong relationship with the person, unless you hate the husband, but that's another story. And your baby now has a new last name. No, it's Expensya by Medius. When people ask us, how does it feel? We always tell them that it's my baby that is getting married, has now a new last name, and it feels weird. And then you're more and more distant because your baby has a new life now. That's the positive way I like to think about it. You also have some taboo discussions. One of the taboos is that as an entrepreneur, you starve a lot. You underpay yourself, you pay people better than yourself. You get used to it year after year, and then you'll suddenly have a lot of money. And so what do you do? And what do you do with that money? And what do you do with the rest of your life? So we had a lot of these conversations. I don't think we have closed them all, but we have adapted ourselves to that. Typically, we are now angel investors, or we invest in funds. We also spent a bit more time in our personal life, although it's not like we sold and we left. We are still full-time employees at Medius. We have now left, but we stayed for 18 months and we had a lot of challenges inside Medius of transforming the company, injecting AI, making Expensya much more global. Today, Expensya grows in the US faster than in Europe, and we didn't have a US market. Now we do, and it is our fastest growing market. The journey is continuing, but we have changed. You see what I mean? The journey is continuing, but Jihan and I, we have changed and we have weird feelings toward the company. And we have much more money than we thought we would have. And we got used to starving for a few years. So that definitely is a strong feeling and it requires a lot of work. And as you said, a lot of people go into depression and we're resisting that and making sure we don't go into depression. And then for the second part of your question is what do you do next in your life? When Expensya was really hard, especially in the middle of COVID, with Jihad, we agreed that we would never do another startup again. Okay. But I think what happens is that I think it's like when people decide to have a second child, I think they forget about how hard it was for the first one. And so for us, it's the same. I think we forgot the tough ones where you're near depression and you want to stop. And now we see AI, we see the opportunity, we see that we could help so many fellow CPOs and CTOs. And the adrenaline is too high, it's too exciting.
Here's where I'm still curious. Humans usually like the respect of their peers and the self-fulfillment very internally of I have accomplished something, I am useful to this world, and then financial comforts for family and the future. Once you hit those three, why go through the pain of entrepreneurship again?
I think, yes, to some extent we have hit these three, but you can still redefine how much impact you want to have, and you can redefine all of that, which gives you basically a higher bar and you want to go after it. But don't underestimate just the level of fun. If you have nothing to do, the week is really long. And you had rather make sure that week is mostly fun. We are geeks. We love building software and we miss it. That's how we agreed, both of us, that it's actually so much more fun to build a new software company than to do something else. But that does not mean that we can't adapt to it. Meaning with Jihad, what we try to do is we go work a week somewhere every month or every other month. And finally, you can also build it with much less ego and much less, I need to prove that I'm an entrepreneur and I can do it. You can do it in a much more chill way of, this is not for me. This is for the opportunity and the impact. The opportunity is allow every single software company to go much faster. And that's an opportunity that we love. And the impact is we haven't given up on creating a Tunisian unicorn. Okay, we sold there is a zero missing. But I think it's exciting to try again.
Perfect segue to my last question, which is that a lot of first-time founders would assume that, oh, you're a second-time founder, you had an exit, things must be so easy for you, investors are begging you to take their money. What are some non-obvious constraint that you face as an exited liquid second-time founder? And what mindset shift is essential to succeed in this next phase?
Very good point. Some of what you said is actually true, meaning raising money is much easier. We have investors that really want to be part of our rounds, and that's a reality. When we spend endless hours convincing investors that, yes, you can have this hybrid company partially in Tunisia, etc. And I think our experience, InstaDeep, other experiences are making it much, much easier. The second reality is that you have more money to hire the right talent in the beginning, so that you don't only have juniors and then you struggle of what I'm going to do after that. And you can, from the beginning, build a more stable team with top talent as well as juniors, and then you can go so much faster. Third is there's a lot of stupid mistakes you make when you start that after the fact you think that was not a good idea, including signing the wrong customers because you need the food, you need the money to pay the salaries. So all of these make it easier to start again. It is true. The things that will never become easier in any venture is product market fit. Your customers don't care that you're a second time founder. They just don't care. They want the right product that solves the right problem at the right price point, and you need to find them, convince them, sign with them. And at the end, that's 90% of the work in a startup. It becomes only easier for the outsiders, but your customers just don't care. So keep that in mind. It won't be easier to anyone. Third thing that is open for debate is, are we better entrepreneurs or not? It's open for debate because when we started, I personally didn't have kids. I now have a baby. Jihad has 2 kids. We have a second full-time job, which is called family. And we also are investors. That takes time. We also do, I wouldn't say charity, but we invest in impact, whether it's education, whether it's competitions here and there. And so all of that begs the question, are we as focused as when we were starting? And what I say to entrepreneurs is be careful with that. Focus is a key success criteria. Don't think that just because I did one success, then everything I touch becomes gold. It doesn't work that way. You have to have the right products, the right customer, and you need a lot of energy to make that happen. And so with Jihad, we self-discipline ourselves to say our investor time is very well defined. Of course, we have our family time and work-life balance, and we use a lot of AI to ensure a good work-life balance. But we have one business.
Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. Good morning.
Really appreciate it. Time will tell. For those who don't know, you're the founder.
Thank you.
This was Expensya. Fun. You've built
Thanks for having me.
Very excited for what you're building next. And thank you for being an inspiration for the past decade and waving the Tunisian flag. It really means a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's super motivating. Thank you.
Cheers.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.